The main purpose of this monthly briefing is to use 1 hour to summarize the main dynamics in the digital developments, which have been accelerating in different fields, ranging from cybersecurity, digital policy, to e-commerce, artificial intelligence, and other areas. We will be using our approach of listing the main events, listing the main, going through the barometer, and then highlighting the 3 trends, and also indicating what we can expect ahead of us during the month of June. Therefore, this is the usual way of doing it. We'll start with could we have the first slide? And I invite our online community and you here in the room to ask the questions, make your comments, insights, because most of you are involved deeply into the digital policy, in different aspects of digital policy, in particular in Geneva. Here is the list of May events during the month of May. There was a Transform Africa Summit in Kigali, Sci-Fi Africa event in Tangier, meeting of Commission on Science and Technology for Development, Global Commission for the Future of Work, 3rd meeting, which was held in Geneva, I for Good, the Global Summit, which was also held in Geneva, a RightCon GlobeSec meeting in Bratislava Forum, Commonwealth Cybersecurity Summit in Kuala Lumpur, 4 Southeast Europe Internet Governance meeting in Ljubljana, Viva Technology in Paris, and 10th International Conference on Cyber Conflict, CICON, which is happening right now in Tallinn. As you can see, it was a very, very busy month. Still, we are at the end of the month of May. Peter, welcome. And we will be now going through the main developments according to barometer. Next, please. As you can see in the field of the development of a global IG infrastructure, there were 2 major developments. The first is the statement of on cybersecurity cooperation of the leaders of the ASEAN countries. They restated the principle that international law applies online, and they invited ASEAN countries to submit examples of the voluntary practical norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. This was quite an interesting reinforcement of the UNGG reports and trying to develop the regional responses. You know what we already discussed. There are quite a few regional activities when it comes to cybersecurity in OSCE, in the Organization of African States, and here we have example from ASEAN. The second development on the global IG infrastructure is the adoption of call to protect the electoral infrastructure by the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace. They basically reacted to the growing calls about protection of the electoral systems. And you will be hearing soon, there will be 2 or 3 commissions established by eminent personalities dealing with the question of digital and protection on the electoral system. And here the Global Commission introduced a few principles, including advocating that governments actively consider disclosure the norms on the electoral process, and they're also now exploring some other rules related to vulnerabilities in cyberspace and the question of disclosure of vulnerabilities to vendors. As you know, the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace is meeting regularly, and they are issuing the norms on proposal of the norms to be used in the cyberspace. When it comes to sustainable development and the overall SDGs, the most important developments was the meeting of Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development and the issue of synthesis report of the access to broadband, focusing on 4 countries: Cambodia, Rwanda, Senegal, and Vanuatu. On security, we had quite a few activities. While as we are discussing, there is a CICON meeting in Tallinn. But there were quite a few developments coming from the UK, and the UK government has implemented new rules to protect national critical infrastructure and digital services from cyber attacks. Companies working in the field of health, water, energy, transport, and digital infrastructure are expected to have robust safeguards in place against cyber threats. And UK Attorney General also outlined how the UK is going to apply international law to cyberspace with regard to the question of right to self-defense, attribution, and the delicate issue to what extent, for example, the UK authorities should provide information in the case of, for example, self-defense defense activities or countermeasures. It is an interesting development because what is currently missing is the lack of understanding of countries' policies when it comes to cybersecurity. And UK is trying to move forward this discussion by explicitly indicating what would be the way of the UK reactions to potential cyber crisis, cyber attacks, and different forms of the cyber-related security risks. Therefore, we will be sending the link with the more analysis. We are preparing analysis of this statement by the Attorney General. In the field of e-commerce and internet economy, the major event was VivaTech, and during this meeting, President Emmanuel Macron, who, by the way, will be tomorrow in Ferne Voltaire, opening Voltaire's house. Therefore, it will be quite a busy security, I guess, if he comes to Geneva. He don't stay only in France. And he basically met 50 key figures from tech industry. And his message is, what is the keynote of the Geneva Internet Platform, that technology has to meet humanity. And he basically said the following, he said that the industry cannot just be free riding without giving back to society and helping to improve social situation, inequalities, and climate change. And he also focused, which is one of the French priorities, to focus on the question of taxation. As you know, France is pushing heavily on the new way of taxation in the European Union and the other places. Then on the e-commerce, there were different activities on WTO. There was the 40 member states of WTO issued a joint statement expressing concern about increasing trade tension. We have a truce in the ongoing trade tension between US and China to avert the planned Section 301 tariffs. And there was also Californian Supreme Court outlining a series of requirements which companies, include those in the sharing economy, should meet in order to classify their workers as individual contractors instead of employees. Therefore, it is quite important opinion by the Californian Supreme Court. Egypt introduced a new law on ride-sharing services, which was welcomed by Uber and other companies in this market. As you know, Uber was banned for some time in Egypt. On digital rights, the main development was obviously last Friday introduction of GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations, and we'll focus on it as one of the major trends and major development in digital policy. Also on digital rights, Mark Zuckerberg was in the European Parliament, and there were mixed sort of feelings about his answers and the way how he dealt with the controversial issues, especially related to the digital rights. Committee of the Minister of European Union adopted the amending protocol to well-known Convention 108, convention that deals with automatic data processing. And this protocol adds the provision that there should be the producers of the software and other applications should have privacy by design solutions. This is now moving more and more into the mainstream, the privacy by design for software developers and other actors. On the jurisdiction, there was the major case of the blocking of the application Telegram, first in Russia and later on in Iran. The blocking of Telegram in Russia triggered quite an interesting development of limits of governments of controlling the traffic over the national borders. Because what's happened basically was that Russian authorities requested Telegram to reveal some information in their anti-crime activities or anti-terrorism activities. Telegram refused to do that, And they basically then first blocked the access to Telegram, but then the blocking was going via IP numbers, and Telegram was shifting the IP numbers from server to servers, coming to the point that it basically started, Russian authorities started blocking other services when Telegram was hosted at the Amazon and those well-known service engines, which created negative reaction of the internet community in Russia, basically complaining that that not only Telegram, which they already complained is blocked, but also other services which are hosted by the same system. It is an interesting development, and we are trying to get to the bottom when it comes to the technological aspects, because it also poses the question, what are the limits and technical limits if governments, for whatever, unjustified democratic or undemocratic reasons, try to filter the access? What are the technical possibilities when you have such interdependence of different services like Telegram being hosted at Amazon and other servers? On the infrastructure, there was a partnership in Facebook and Qualcomm on the new telegraph technology links, wireless links. And on net neutrality, the US Senate voted in favor to overturn the Federal Communication Commission, FCC, decision to repeal the net neutrality rules. It was vote 52-47, therefore some Republicans went on the other side against the general Republican policy when it comes to net neutrality. But in order to overturn this regulation, there is a need for congressional vote and there is a need for the signature of president. Therefore, new net neutrality rules, which are basically challenging net neutrality concept, will enter into force in June. This is the major development. And we have then the questions of new technologies, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. We'll discuss the French president call for the companies on artificial intelligence, which was the main element on discussion at the Viva Tech. There was a Toronto declaration which called the companies not to discriminate and not to infringe the human rights by the introduction of machine learning systems. Toronto Declaration was issued by a RightCon meeting, which is annual meeting of the civil society, tech industry, government, and other actors, which is becoming one of the major meetings globally when it comes in particular to interplay between human rights and technology. Then there was the California-based self-driving car company Drive AI announced that they will have soon their completely driverless car without driver as a seat driving on public roads in the city of Frisco, Texas. Be careful if you plan to visit Frisco during the summer. Make sure that you notice the driverless car. And then there is European Union Commission has set measures to modernize European transport system. Among them is communication entitled On the Road to Automated Mobility, an EU strategy for mobility of the future. If you're familiar with the EU's way of dealing with policy issues, communication is very often the first step towards preparing some sort of policies. Uber announced the decision to shut down its self-driving car program in Arizona, United States, after the famous incident when the bicycle rider basically was killed in the traffic incident. And we'll share with you in the follow-up the link. It's a very interesting video because we have been analyzing it a lot. If the normal sort of not machine driver would have avoided this, it was almost impossible to avoid this crash. And this is an interesting dilemma. Are we more strict towards the responsibility of machines than towards the responsibility of humans? This is the more or less explanation of the barometer, what has been happening, and now we are going towards the 3 trends which we identify in this field. Any question on this point? Because now we'll be going drilling into the trends. Any question, comment on the summary of the major developments? No. Okay. Okay, what were the main trends in May? Now, the first trend obviously is GDPR. Guess what? It was easy to outline. I'm sure that you know the arguments about GDPR. What is it? Introducing on the practical level, the question of consent for the use of data by the users, the question of extraterritorial application of GDPR wherever data of European citizens is located. The question on some analysis, the question which were more political economy analysis, arguing that Europe is trying to sort of push their own digital industry by keeping the data on its territory. Therefore, there are many sort of commentaries, and I will be guided by your question in what direction you would like our discussion to go, whether it is the specificities of GDPR or a broader context. What we have now, and I will just narrate the facts, what happened after last Friday, we have two major court cases of relevance for us. The first is ICANN filed a legal action against German-based domain name register EPAG over the register decision to stop collecting administrative and technical contact information when domain names are registered. EPAG argued that's fine that we have bylaws of ICANN, but now we have a risk that we can be fined 20 million, I would say that would be more serious for them, 20 million euros, and we won't play with this, we won't just collect the information. Now, temporary decision of the ICANN argues that the information should be collected, but they shouldn't be revealed they should be revealed according to certain rules. We don't have Nigel today with us, but for those of you who are new in the discussion is about who is database contain information about people who register domains, and it is not in accordance with the GDPR. ICANN reacted relatively late with adjusting this policy, and now they have the first court case, and we'll see what will happen. It is not an easy decision because it goes into the sort of way how ICANN operates. There are arguments that this who is information should be provided for the investigators, for the people who are trying to reduce the use of cybercrime. This is an interesting debate, and we can go later on into more details. The second immediate action which happened on Friday was initiated by Max Schrems, and you know Max Schrems is the famous Austrian privacy advocate who made quite a few sleepless nights to the Facebook legal team over the privacy shield and other developments. He was challenging these activities, and he basically filed complaints against Facebook and Google. He's extending his battle, accusing them of coercing users into accepting their data collection policy. This is now an important issue. What about choice? Do they have a choice? And this interesting discussion about choice. What type of choice we have? This, and he argues that it's against the GDPR to force users to make this type of choices. He's asking the complaints worth 3.9 billion were filed against Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram via data regulators in Austria, Belgium, and Hamburg. While another complaint against Google worth 3.7 billion was filed in France. We're speaking about serious money, and basically we will be waiting for quite some to see what will happen with the enforcement of GDPR. I would say many actors worldwide, companies and regulators are waiting to see what will happen, let's say, till the end of the year. European Union announced that they are very serious. When they asked him, for example, ICANN them, are you serious? Can we make some? The answer was clear, no. And I guess that it is a legal challenge for Europe if they make any sort of unnecessary watering down of GDPR, it will be taken negatively. Therefore, this will be interesting digital policy battle ahead of us. Again, it will be fought in courts and European courts, and the sum is, as you can indicate, as you can see, quite high. GDPR is brought many controversies in digital debate. One of controversies is raised by blockchain community. As you know, the principle of blockchain is that data is preserved it's immutable. It is preserved in blockchain as blocks, and the question is that what would happen if the GDPR regulators, data protection authority, request from the companies to delete some data from blockchain, which is basically one of the requirements of the GDPR. In quite a few provisions, you have a request for the deletion of data. Therefore, the whole concept of a blockchain, which is based on immutable data, safe for eternity, can face, like ICANN is facing problem now with GDPR authorities, it can go against the GDPR regulation. And we will be following it carefully. We will already preparing some sort of policy feedback on that. That could be torpedo for the whole concept of the blockchain technology, because substantially, philosophically, there is a bit of conflict between two concepts. The second main trend, and Kasia is coming. Kasia, we're just finishing a GDPR discussion. But you can comment later on. Okay. Kasia is from the European Union EAS Commission. Yeah. No, we were not too critical about EU. Don't worry. No. Yes. Now you have a full grasp of GDPR. Yes. That's it. Okay. Good. The second trend, in addition to GDPR, was the scrutiny over Facebook practices and generally testing of the model, database model of the internet industry. Mr. Mark Zuckerberg came to European Parliament. Parliamentarians were not particularly happy how he answered their questions. He basically passed quite a few questions in Congress. He passed 43 questions to his team. Here now, in the much shorter time span, he's passed almost 20 questions to his team. He basically didn't answer the core question, which is his view about data regulation. As you know, he in principle adopted GDPR and he was happy to apply GDPR, but then he moved almost 1.5 billion of his users from Irish jurisdiction to the US jurisdiction. Therefore, one is rhetorics, one is the other aspect is the practical activities. That was an interesting trend, and we noticed that there is increasing scrutiny about the business model and data protection in the public discussion, and it will continue as important discussion. It was triggered by Zuckerberg's hearing in the US Congress, and it is continuing. It continued in the month of May with this presentation hearing in the EU Parliament, but also in overall discussion, ultimately trying to answer the question how to make sustainable business model for internet companies. Are we willing to pay by our data? Or if not by data, are we willing to pay some fees? Because ultimately discussion will come to that point, because these companies have their costs, they have to pay for servers. Mr. Zuckerberg has to pay 10,000 content employees dealing with the content, and there are expenses, and obviously to make some profit. But this issue will be staying in the focus on the global debate, and its good news is that it is now clear discussion. It's not covered by any sort of general narratives. It is clear discussion who is going to pay for this useful service. And then the third major development is related to artificial intelligence. I'm sure that quite a few attended the meeting of the AI for Good here at the ITU. We had a chance to see again Sophie. Sophie is growing. She's very nice. You know the robot, famous robot. It attracted a lot of attention. I noticed quite a few people shaking hands, asking questions. And that's good that Sophie is in the good health, but we'll see what will happen with the other issues. We prepared quite detailed report from the AI for Good. What we noticed is the one interesting aspect. I asked my colleagues who were reporting, and they were sort of excited about the discussion. But when I was reading a report, this report looked quite weak, and I said, "Oh, I haven't missed that many things." You know, it's again about opportunities. Future is bright. But there are ethical problems, you know, usual AI narrative. And I was wondering, it would be interesting to hear from some of you if the narratives have moved beyond the usual sort of framing of the issues, or Richard is thinking that there is nothing new. in this field. Then President Macron, during the Viva Tech, proposed the Global Governance Commission on Artificial Intelligence. And we were checking with a few French colleagues if it was a part of the text, his speech that he was reading, or it was the improvisation of the CAF. It seems that quite part of the speech were just the improvisation. You know, famous in diplomacy and in policy, you look if it was the agreed statement by the policy team, which is a reflection of policy, or it was improvisation on the spot of the politicians for whatever reasons. It still remains ambiguous if it is the official proposal. And he mentioned the Canadian Prime Minister, the two of them should initiate a global commission on artificial intelligence. I'm sure they will hear the details from Christiane about the composition of this commission. Then Viva Tech was really important event. As you know, he announced the Internet Governance Forum to be held in November this year, together with the celebration of 100 years of the end of the First World War. Now, First World War is one of the trickiest metaphor in history, because you don't know you know how it started in Sarajevo. It was one of, and I don't know how this parallel will be developed. We are preparing panel session for the IGF. We'll propose it, making a parallels between start of the First World War technological developments and the current era. But I can tell you it is difficult to frame it, because if you frame it as a direct parallel, it could be quite negative connotation, which is not necessarily proper. For example, one of the contribution to the outbreak of the First World War was confusion in communication, because Wilhelm and Tsar Nicholas in St. Petersburg, they call each other Willy and Nicky, and they discovered telegraph, and they were exchanging messages. And at the crucial time in late June, we studied it day by day, hour by hour, Willy sent to Nicky a sort of antagonistic message. But then immediately, a few hours later, he sent a more conciliatory message. Let us not go to war, we can fix these things. But Nicky replied to the previous message. And more or less at that point, the communication between Russia and Germany stopped. And then we had the developments in July and the bloody, crazy August 1914. We'll try to see maybe to add something constructively what we can learn from history when it comes to the First World War. Now, on the artificial intelligence, there is discussion, and it's becoming quite intensive discussion on the facial recognition technologies. And if you can recall what was one of the substantive answers of Mr. Zuckerberg in the Congress, was his concern about facial recognition technologies. But his argument was basically, hey, we have to do it, we are not happy about it, we have to do it, and one of his argument is, well, even if we don't do it, Chinese will do it, and they will go ahead technologically ahead of us. Therefore, please be more tolerant about us using facial recognition technologies. Now, there is discussion in the UK, face of the lawless growth of facial recognition in UK policing. There is a momentum by civil society arguing against facial recognition. And there is a request in 30 US-based civil society signed a letter requesting Amazon from stop selling the facial recognition technology to the US government and authorities. Therefore, that will be an interesting development ahead of us. Therefore, three major trends: EU GDPR with many open questions, but two concrete developments: ICANN legal action and Max Schramm action against Google and Facebook. Second is scrutiny over Facebook continues in the European Parliament. And third one, AI development, mainly with Viva Tech and President Macron's announcement of the development of the Commission on artificial intelligence. Now, one important development which is announced to the expert community and expert group, and I guess most of you are in expert group, there is a Swiss initiative to start a Geneva dialogue on the responsible behavior in cyberspace. and it will probably be officially announced over the next 10 days. I would like to alert you about this development, asking the question basically, what is the responsible behavior of national states, what is the responsibility of private sector, and what is the responsibility of users. And the idea is to have a dialogue and to come to some sort of insights, possibly principles on the responsibility of these three communities for their activities in cyberspace. With governments being more or less clear, because UNGG already codified the government responsibility, more open for the private sector and the responsibility of users. Next one. Developments in month of June. Well, you know how to read well what is the we'll have a G70. We have Eurodig in Tbilisi, IoT summit in Bilbao, G7 summit, which is always important for the digital policy, CeBIT technical community meeting, technical big fair in Hanover. Global ICT Capacity Building Symposium in Santo Domingo, Geneva Internet Law Summer School, and there will be also conference on cybersecurity organized by University of Geneva. We'll send you the information co-organized by Hebrew University and University of Geneva, and it will be an interesting event, also focusing on liabilities and responsibilities in cyberspace. Digital Assembly Sofia, end of the Bulgarian presidency of the European Union, ICANN 62, Panama City, and Webit Festival Europe in Sofia as well. Those are major developments. We'll probably next what's going on at the GIP. Our newsletter will be on 31st of May. Then you will have a 5th of June workshop, Invest in Cybersecurity. We invited the Geneva, I don't know exact name, but Geneva Enterprise, Global Enterprise, to come to GIP and to tell us what are the consideration of the investment in cybersecurity, that interplay, economic interplay, cybersecurity as a new business opportunity. And they will be here. Just-in-time reporting, we'll report from Eurodig in Tbilisi, 18, 19, 29, the Geneva Internet Law School, and the conference, which I send you the more details, and possibly discussion towards a global convergence of personal protection standards. I guess we may hear later on more about it. I know my colleague Stephanie and Kashi are discussing this possible event to see what we can, what would be the impact of GDPR globally. Well, with this, I guess that's all for my introduction. That's almost half an hour. We have questions now. Richard, you were slow today. Christian.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much, Jovan. Christiane Roy from the Canadian Permanent Mission. I think that in your list you're missing one element very important. We've got the Human Rights Council starting in June, and there are two key resolutions which matter to us. One is led by Sweden and focuses on freedoms online, and the other one is one that is led by Canada. In and of itself, it's not normally an internet governance related concern. It's the one that we run on violence against women. But every year we change the theme. So 2 years ago it was the violence against Indigenous women. Last year it was the role of men and boys in preventing violence against women. So this year we're going to look at online violence. So we're going to have a resolution to that effect in the Human Rights Council coming up, starting I think June 18th or something like that.
Well, we were aware of it, but we wanted to see if the audience will recognize that here we are missing. No, I'm joking. Thank you very much for this. As you know, this is basically the interesting trend which is happening in Geneva, that the resolutions or policy dynamics which are in the past, like violence against women or the discussion WHO and other, are getting more and more digital dimension. And this is, I think, the clear trend of digitalization of traditional policy issues. And we have obviously Freedom Online resolution, which was initiated by Sweden, and which will get the new sort of reiteration in June. Thank you for this reminder. Any other comment, please? Could you introduce yourself?
Uwe Petri, German Permanent Mission. It might have been mentioned right at the beginning, sorry for being late, But you mentioned again WHO. There was an important resolution on digital health adopted last week by the World Health Assembly, also saying that WHO and relevant stakeholders should work together, which means that there will be also more cooperation between organizations in Geneva in that field.
Thank you. We're in the process of rearranging our taxonomy. What we noticed, usual infrastructure-driven, icon-driven, which was traditional way of covering IG, is shifting towards the issues of health. And thank you for this reminder. Also, ILO Commission, which had a meeting, is also the future work is more and more digital. Basically, it deals with the future work, but it is the and WHO is interesting organization because digital is appearing in different contexts. For example, sort of online gaming and the dependence on online gaming. Then there is a question of health data. There is a question of the AI and digital. Therefore, there are different aspects where digital is appearing. If you don't have any other question or comments from here, then we have from online.
Thank you, Jovan. We have quite a lot of questions, and especially, well, basically they are all about privacy and the GDPR. The first question was from Romina. I have four. To what extent will the GDPR affect or limit the diffusion of knowledge and communication? For example, by limiting data transfers for scientific research or communication channels, as they might not be compatible. So really kind of the balance between the GDPR and maybe other online freedoms. The second question is from Sohida, and she asks, the EU-US Privacy Shield framework became operational on the 1st of August 2016. This framework protects the fundamental rights of anyone in the EU whose personal data is transferred to the United States for commercial purposes. What is the relation and maybe the difference with the GDPR, since both are about protecting personal data of EU citizens? And Katarina proposed a follow-up question, what is the relation with the US Cloud Act? So really about these kind of convergencies between international data protection agreements. And in this context, Shin Yamasaki was wondering whether there are any treaties between the EU and Switzerland about personal privacy protection. The last question was from Aida, and she asked what is behind Microsoft's intentions to extend the GDPR rules, because Microsoft has claimed that it will do so for the rest of the world as well, if they cannot be enforced globally. Therefore, no one outside the EU will be able to file an official complaint based on the GDPR, nor will Microsoft be required to pay fines for not following the law outside of the EU. So there are 4 questions. Over to you.
Well, I'm sure I will get some help from the audience here, who is following carefully these developments. Well, the impact on the communication, the freedom of communication, will be clear. We don't know in what direction the impact will move. There are some critical views, for example, that small companies will be affected more than these big guys who can invest the money to introduce new rules. And I think the verdict is out. We'll have to wait for next, I would say definitely 6 months, or if not 1 year, to see what are the collateral impacts of the GDPR. As you know, for example, one of the tricky developments of this regulation happened in Germany with the new law against the hate speech, where basically it addressed the question of hate speech, but it also made the company very enthusiastic to filter the content, because in the fear that they may be sort of have to pay huge fines, they started in a way censoring some of the content. A digital policy is extremely delicate, because we forget that this is not about digital, this is about society, because digital is so embedded into the social dynamics and social and cultural dynamics of societies that you really don't know how what would be the impact of almost any decision, including, let's say, rather not trivial, rather simple decision of banning hate speech. This is straightforward, you know what is hate speech, it's defined by law, you just ban the hate speech, and okay, that we implement that. let alone such a complex decision regulation as the GDPR. Therefore, it's difficult. It is difficult to know. We'll keep you updated on discussion, for example, on blockchain and GDPR, which is very interesting discussion. It's fundamental difference that exists between blockchain or immutable and the GDPR request to delete data under certain circumstances. This is really almost philosophical, conceptual contradiction. GDPR Privacy Shield, I don't know details, but I guess it will be overruled. Privacy Shield is not anymore needed if the European citizens' data will be protected according to the internet companies have to protect according to, but Kasia, you will comment later on in more details. US Cloud Act. US Cloud Act is very specific because it deals with providing data by US internet companies to the law enforcement authorities in the countries outside who are in a way certified that they can request the data. They're certified in terms of due processes, observance of the human rights, strength of juridical system. Therefore, the key idea is that internet companies cannot send the data to the countries that do not have high standards of juridical, democratic, and human rights standards. Therefore, that's the basic idea. And the real question is really, I don't see a contradiction with the GDPR, because GDPR allows access to data for the public interest and juridical processes and other things. This is more mechanisms how the private companies will share data with European law enforcement agencies and other governments. You're familiar with the Cloud Act. Cloud Act is a way of making more efficient exchange of data in investigation processes, in a way bypassing the slow MLAT process, mutual legal assistance treaties, which are quite slow for the digital investigation. Switzerland has quite a sort of aligned data protection rules with the European Union. It's a party to the Convention 108 of the Council of Europe, but there is still a Swiss Parliament is still basically waiting for introduction on GDPR-related regulation. Maybe Richard, since you are involved with Internet Society in discussion, you will reflect on it more. Microsoft GDPR. I think it's sort of in a way expected decision. Microsoft is not making money, or most of its money, by mining data of their users. Microsoft is selling software, is selling servers, it's selling clouds, but for Microsoft, the Microsoft is, as we have been discussed, probably the closely aligned to the public policy regulation, because it has quite a clear business model. It doesn't have this data business model, which is basically the main target of GDPR, where you don't know what is happening with data. Microsoft sells the software, server space in the cloud, and that's the reason why for them it is relatively easy just to introduce GDPR. I will ask now Richard to tell us about Switzerland and EU, and then Kasia, if you don't mind, to reflect on.
And I have a couple of other comments. Can I also? Yeah, great thing. So in Switzerland, so when the directive was passed, the previous data protection regulation, Switzerland very rapidly adopted a law which is essentially identical, and that's in force now in Switzerland. In 1995? Yeah, must have been back then. It was almost immediately. That's when they thought maybe they joined the EU, so they were keen to align as quickly as possible. Now that the GDPR is here, a number of groups, including industry, have said, well, okay, now we need to adapt, otherwise we'll lose the ability to transfer data with Europe. But the Parliament doesn't seem to be in a hurry. The Parliament is saying, well, let's take our time and see how it goes, and so on. So right now, they're just not actually planning. Well, they are planning to adapt the Swiss law, but not very fast. They're talking about maybe 2-3 years. And again, some people are saying, no, that's too slow, we have to go sooner. It seems to me that the next step will be the EU deciding whether or not Switzerland has an equivalent protection. If it doesn't, I expect the Parliament will act very quickly. If it does, then there's no reason to move, because the current Swiss law is considered to be equivalent. Now, that leads me to one of the other comments I wanted to make. There's the question of consent under the GDPR, and I'm glad that Schrems has raised this. I was asked to make a presentation to the Internet Society Portugal on the GDPR. And so I researched two issues. One is consent, and I'll come to the other one in a second. And actually, if you read the recitals, the whereases, it's not at all obvious that the consent requirement under the GDPR is the same as the consent requirement under the directive. So, and I think that that's what Schrems is picking up on, because you read the text of the regulation seems to be basically the same as the text of the directive. But then when you go look at the whereases, you see that they wanted to make it stricter in that they can't, for example, force you block consent. So let's take the specific case of Facebook. Facebook is basically saying you consent or you don't, and then maybe you can tweak the privacy things. But if you don't consent, you lose the entire service. And the GDPR, if you read the whereases, seems to be saying, no, the consent has to be much more granular, and you can't give a take it or leave it option to the consumer. So it's entirely possible that the consent requirement under the GDPR will be much stricter than under the directive, in which case Switzerland would not be equivalent and they'd have to do something. So I think that remains to be, yeah, the old one, yeah. So that, I think, is something that's going to create a lot of trouble for a lot of people, because clearly the main internet giants don't seem to think there's an issue. They seem to think, no, it's the same consent as we had before and everything's fine. And you're agreeing with me. That's probably not the way it's going to go. Now, the second issue that I talked about was the Microsoft Ireland case. You know that case, which was solved by the Cloud Act, by the way, and then I'll come to the Cloud Act. The US was conducting an investigation of some alleged drug dealers. And as part of that, they got a subpoena to get some emails from these people. And those emails were actually stored by Microsoft in a server in Ireland. And so Microsoft said, well, we can't give it because of the European data protection law. And the US authorities said, well, we don't care, you're a US company, you have to give it anyway. It went to the Supreme Court. Before it was decided by the Supreme Court, they passed the Cloud Act, which I'll come to. So it was moot and they released the data. Now, the interesting speculative question is, how would that case have gone if the GDPR had been in effect? Because there's a specific provision in the GDPR that says that you're not allowed to give data to other jurisdictions merely because they're asking for it legally. What's quite surprising, and I don't know who here has seen it, in the US Supreme Court, you can file what they call amicus curiae briefs. So you're not a party, but you send in your legal opinion just so the court can have a look at it. And basically anybody can do that. It has to be formatted correctly, so you can't do it as an amateur. You have to hire a lawyer and so on, but basically anybody can do that. European Commission filed an amicus brief. And most people who've looked at that carefully, including me, find that brief is extremely surprising, because it's basically saying, well, that provision in the GDPR, it says that, but you have to be aware of the fact that there are exceptions, and one of the ones is the one exactly that Jovan mentioned, public interest. And they go on to say that law enforcement is a public interest, so maybe you could give the data to the US law enforcement authorities absent a mutual legal agreement treaty, because that's the issue, even though it ostensibly conflicts with the GDPR. It doesn't quite say that, but it's kind of a strange thing from the point of view of certain people like myself, for the European Commission to have waffled on that. I actually know somebody who was in the group that did that, and that person said, yeah, it was a very tough discussion and it was a compromise. Some people were saying, don't say anything. Some people would say absolutely, you cannot give the data. Other people saying, give the data. So they came out with some kind of strange compromise that you can see. If anybody's interested, I can send the references to Jovan. And then final comment on the Cloud Act. Many US civil society organizations, including the Electronic Frontier Foundation, are highly critical of the Cloud Act, because the arrangements for exchange that Jovan was mentioned are negotiated directly by the executives. They're not treaties, so there's no parliamentary supervision. And once those are in place, there's no more judicial supervision. So right now there are no deals, so it's a one-way street. US companies must give data to US law enforcement authorities, no matter where it's stored in the world, but it's not reciprocal. It will only be reciprocal when there's an agreement between the US and, say, the EU or whatever. But I think it's highly unlikely that any country will agree to those bilateral agreements, except maybe ones that are highly subject to US influence, of which there are many. So we'll see what happens. And then again, from a civil society point of view, we're very critical of that, because these are just negotiated by executives without the involvement of parliament, and then there's no more judicial review. The warrant is directly applicable. Sorry? Information. Civil society organizations are not happy with that.
Thank you for really this good comments on Cloud Act and clarifying this sort of ambiguous situation with the Swiss data protection role. Because we are on the real Chatham House rules, and well, we have the EAS representative in personal capacity. Could you reflect on some of these questions?
Thank you very much. However, don't expect too detailed expertise on me, but just the general lines on the question concerning the adequacy decision and the GDPR. So the adequacy agreements are complementary to the GDPR, and they are actually still very much valid. The proof of that is that the EU is currently negotiating this agreement with main trading partners such as Japan, I think Mercosur as well, and Brazil. And by this agreement, the third country confirms that they have equivalent standards for protection of personal data as the EU, and this facilitates the data flows. So this would be my first comment. My second comment is on the consent. Indeed, the notion of consent has changed under the GDPR. It now is much more strict. It has to be clear and distinguishable from other matters. And I don't know if this is also your experience, but my personal experience is that I received requests from various newsletters whether I really consent to receive them still following the entry into force of the GDPR. So this means that the industry has understood that the consent is notion has changed. And maybe one more point of information, there is a very good portal developed by the European Commission, which is called the EU and GDPR, which explains in plain language the GDPR to the audience. So I would recommend that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. We have the... No questions. Well, my time management is always challenged. Now that's... well, we have a question. Yeah, please. Okay.
Thanks, Jordan Wallace from ICTSD. I appreciate you mentioned just one question about these implications for trade community, and particularly the trade discussion, e-commerce negotiations in WTO. That you mentioned influence to the online games sectors, but on broader terms, for example, data flow, free data flow things, and server localization requirements. Any Jovan or any colleagues can comment on that? Thank you.
Well, that's the general interplay between. Thank you for the comment. Interplay between human rights, technical, legal aspects, and in this case, commercial. The question of trade. There will be definitely impact because some companies will be affected. But it's not clear yet in what direction that how serious that impact will be. Definitely, European companies which have already integrated a high level of data protection will have advantage comparing to the, let's say, companies coming from other jurisdiction where the data protection is much more relaxed. Because European Union companies had to follow data protection because of national jurisdiction and the regulation from Directive 1995. That's not completely clear. There are some sort of guessings, indications, and as you know, the data flows are quite important issues in the WTO, sort of a negotiation of like-minded countries or plurilateral negotiation. That we will be hearing more and more, in particular in Geneva, on this interplays between human rights, health, WTO, standardization. This is another development which I just realized that we didn't include, that ISO is starting preparing new standard on the privacy by design. And as you know, ISO is very, very powerful organization because it impacts standards and the way how technology is developed. And unfortunately, I cannot give any precise and concrete answer except sort of informed guessing about the positioning. But what is clear is that policy issues are becoming important part of the business model. This is very clear. Zuckerberg announced 10,000 content controllers. We are having more and more companies, and we are hearing about companies from China, from the Southeast Asia, paying more and more attention about policy aspects. And to some extent what's going on in Geneva when it comes to the policy aspects. Therefore, it will be definitely a new trend. Thank you for zooming out our discussion to and bringing trade aspect into consideration. I guess that will be all for our briefing today. We'll have the one more briefing before the summer in June. In the meantime, we'll be updating you on all of those developments. We are not going to introduce mid-month briefings, but developments are becoming so fast that we'll keep you updated. Don't worry. Well, best regards to our online community, and thank you. We'll continue now with local hubs, African, Asian, and Latin American hubs, basically reflecting on the local developments in their communities. While we here in Geneva will continue with refreshment and our corridor discussion, what's going on in digital policy. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, everyone, for the roundup of developments in May, and Barbara for moderating the online conversation, and of course sharing questions from the audience. For our online participants, we now have the regional updates, so we invite you to stay with us. First, we have Sita Lakshmi. Sita has updates from the meeting of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. Sita, over to you.
Hello from Jakarta. I'm bringing news from Association of Southeast Asia Nations, or in abbreviation ASEAN, after a series of meetings held in Singapore for the 32nd ASEAN Meeting Summit. There are two main issues related to digital policy. One is ASEAN Smart City Network. 10 ASEAN leaders have agreed to fulfill the visions to build a resilient and innovative ASEAN in the middle of rapid changes in Southeast Asia and beyond. The Smart City Network aims as a collaborative platform where up to 3 cities per ASEAN countries working toward a common goal of smart and sustainable urban development. 20 cities were being selected. Second is, ASEAN Summit meeting has put cybersecurity in the spotlight. ASEAN has agreed on the adoption of cybersecurity in the ASEAN agenda. This is due to the recognition of growing urgency and sophistication of transboundary cyber threats. Few days after the ASEAN Summit meeting was over, the ministers that are responsible for information gathered still in Singapore, because Singapore is chairing the ASEAN now, discussed on how to tackle fake news. The ministers agreed to collaborate and exchange best practices in combating fake news and mitigating its harmful effects. They started to develop a framework and joint declarations that will serve as a basis for cooperation, share ideas, and propose viable solutions. Thank you very much.
From the Caribbean region. So over to Wanda.
With updates from the Caribbean, this is Wanda Perez. In Caribbean, the only directory of Caribbean infrastructure suppliers was launched, serving as a resource that bridges the gap between private sector suppliers and government, utility, and regional development agencies. Mrs. Lauren Thomas, directory's developer and owner, said, "Globally, the conversation has turned toward building sustainable and climate-resilient infrastructure. For Caribbean countries, it's at the top of the agenda. However, decision makers aren't always aware of state-of-the-art solutions and technologies, and they don't have immediate access to the expertise. On the other hand, companies that do business or want to do business in the region in this space often find it difficult to get in front of the decision makers. InCarib bridges the gap. InCarib.net is hoping that every company that is dedicated to enabling, sustaining, and improving Caribbean living conditions will register to get listed today by visiting the website and completing the application. The site is live while the directory is being populated and will be available by August 2018. Financial institutions in Caribbean territories under European Union jurisdiction are gearing up to implement the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. Under the regulations, individuals have the right to access and review their personal data and ask for changes to the company collecting the information, having also the right to move data collected to another entity. The regulations will go into effect in the Caribbean, Dutch, French, and British territories, all of which fall under European Union jurisdiction. Caribbean financial leaders met in Suriname to discuss this new regulation and discuss about GDPR compliance. They met in an event initiated by the Caribbean Telecommunication Union, CTU, and the Caribbean Community, CARICOM.
Thank you, Wanda. That was Wanda with updates from the Caribbean. Next, we have Luca Belli, and Luca has updates from Latin America. So over to you, Luca.
Good morning, Jovan. Good morning to everyone. Welcome back to Rio de Janeiro. The month of May started with a quite important decision by the Superior Court of Justice, which is the highest appellate court here in Brazil. The decision was on the so-called right to be forgotten, and it was in favor of the de-indexation of specific information when specific individuals obtain an injunction that orders to de-index such information. The day after this decision was taken, in Brasilia, on the 9th of May, the Chamber of Deputies approved a bill on the so-called positive credit registry. This bill is also approved by the Senate, will create a new unique database where all information necessary to create credit scoring of consumer will be automatically consolidated and will be accessible to all financial institutions and also to fintechs. The representative of the financial sector have obviously welcomed the creation of this new database, but this legislation has also been criticized by consumer associations, arguing that the mere possibility to opt out from this system in the first month since the creation, the approval of the law, it is not a sufficient guarantee to protect consumers' rights. Lastly, in Chile, good news from the Chilean Congress that approved a new data protection legislation, an update to the previous framework, creating a new data protection authority and also enshrining data protection as a constitutional right. This legislation includes some elements that are very similar to the new GDPR that is going to be adopted in all the European Union this month and create a very compatible system. That's all for this month, and we will see you with further updates in July.
Thank you. That was Luca. So thank you, Sita, Wanda, and Luca for sharing the updates from your regions. This brings us to the end of our May briefing on internet governance and digital policy. All the developments that Jovan mentioned that were included in the PowerPoint, and even that Sita, Wanda, and Luca have just described, are on the observatory, and the link is dig.watch. One final announcement: we will have the newsletter, the Geneva Digital Watch newsletter for May. It will be available on the 31st, which you can also download from the observatory. Or the direct link, which is dig.watch/newsletter. So thank you for participating in today's briefing, and see you again next month. Bye.